What we've been seeing the last few years since the invasion of Ukraine, because a lot of the Russian legal residencies in Europe have been shut down and they've been sent home, is that the illegals have been activated.
So Dan, just start by telling me who you are.
Sure. Dan Stanton. I'm Director of National Security at the University of Ottawa's Professional Development Institute. And I worked for Canadian Security Intelligence Service for 32 years. I finished university at Queen's University, a degree in history, which landed me full-time employment in Fat Alberts, making pizzas and submarines for about a year. And I came across this book written by John Sawatsky called The Men in the Shadows. And it was about the RCMP Security Service. I thought, okay, this beats making pizzas. So I filled out a resume and mailed it to the RCMP, and I put attention security service. And then I forgot about it. They no doubt forgot about it. And then a few years later, I'm in Toronto, I'm selling shoes, I get a phone call. Seems my resume made its way from the security service to this new organization called CSIS. And that began a process of selection, recruitment, leading to 5 months training up at Base Borden.
What was the appeal of this world?
What intrigued me the most is, as a student of history, I recognize that a lot of the events that take place in the world stem from our history, and so I'd read a lot. I'd read a lot about espionage history, British intelligence, American intelligence, and so to actually be on the ground floor of a new organization where the mandate at that time was principally counterintelligence, it was quite intriguing.
What is counterintelligence?
Well, counterintelligence is basically, you have two types. You have a defensive counterintelligence and an offensive intelligence. And it's really safeguarding, protecting your secrets, the government secrets, military secrets, and so on. And also activities from hostile intelligence services, which may go beyond just simply stealing secrets. It could be certain types of influence operations or transnational repression. So on the defensive side, it's basically, as implied, protecting our institutions and our facilities from this type of penetration. And an offensive counterintelligence is, as it implies, basically be aggressively going after those entities to find out who they may have on our side recruited. So it's really a large shield in a way in terms of maintaining and protecting national security.
Tell me about what most of your work at the service as an intelligence officer entailed. What are you doing? A
lot of the work in the service from the earliest days through right actually to the end of my career was involved in what we call human source. It's the identification, cultivation, and recruitment of human sources. So I recruited sources, I ran sources, managed sources, and then as a manager I was involved a lot in assessing their information and in future recruitments done in various capacities. And so a lot of that human behavior type work, getting to know people, getting to assess reliability, is most of what I did in terms of the operational side of the service. Whether it was in a counterterrorism domain or whether it was in a counterintelligence domain, counterproliferation of destabilizing weapons, a lot of it was looking at the people that can help us and provide information.
How do you know when you can trust a source?
In my opinion, you will never have that certainty. Every time I met with a source, it was kind of a re-recruitment, if you will. It's like Herodotus had said, you can never step in the river in the same place twice. There's always a flow. People's lives change. Circumstances change. And so, yes, we do have a relationship and it's solid and it's established, but in a way you need to always be watching and you need to be guarded to a certain degree.
What's the difference between a double agent and a triple agent?
I don't think triple agents I think a triple agent might be a source, or a double agent that wasn't properly vetted. A double agent, generally speaking, is let's say another intelligence services source or agent, is we've doubled them. And I have some experience in that. We've done that over the years. And so their loyalty is to you, not to that other agency. The triple agent would imply then that they never really were recruited by our organization, and so they were always working for that other side, unless, of course, they go bad while they're in their relationship. That could happen. I guess you could call it a triple agent, but I think you basically have an agent, and then you have one that's been doubled to give you a certain, I guess you could say, tactical leverage against that other organization.
You mentioned that you have some experience in that area. Are there any double agents that you've run that you can discuss?
It's delicate, but yeah, I think the key thing is what may sound terribly bureaucratic is staying on top of details and keeping a very good, accurate record of the relationship, of what's been passed, information been received, things like that. You have to really have a good balance sheet, because the biggest criticism of double agent cases is that you may not be getting enough information to make it worthwhile, exposing your program, let's say, to an adversary. So you need to have really good record keeping, and you need to basically have an accounting of everything that's taken place, because you could end up losing more than you've actually gained.
What can you tell me about your first big operation? Whatever that was. Like, most significant thing earlier in your career that really stands out to you that you can share.
It's hard to share. It was
no problem.
It was a double agent operation, but it was quite big.
Well, maybe
Let me tell you. You know what? I'll tell you one.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll tell you one, and it's kind of related in a way. It was an individual that I wanted to talk to because of someone he had contact with, and we learned this through sensitive means. And so I started with just this straight up phone call. It put me off a few times, and then eventually met him. And I met him probably 5-6 times. Didn't give me much information at all, and then eventually did, but was very, very evasive. And I was persistent, but not in an annoying way. And I was young. I was, I'd been in the service maybe a year and a half or something like that, and it was a bit of an age difference. But he said later, part of the reason I cooperated is I couldn't get rid of you. So I took that as a compliment. And that's often happened. Again, people that you really, really want to talk to, they just don't want it. And oddly enough, sometimes the people that you don't want to talk to, that you just can't get rid of them. But I realized in retrospect what was happening was he was assessing me just as much as I was assessing him. Can I confide in this young fellow, or is it going to be in the Globe and Mail next day? So I sort of took that as a learning lesson in a way, that it's never easy, that you don't just talk to somebody once or twice, and you have to rely on your personality, because with the CSIS, with intelligence officers and CSIS, they don't have a badge, so people could tell you to go away. And so you have to rely on your personality in a way of giving them that assurance that you're for real, that you're a serious person, and that you can be trusted as well.
To whatever extent you can share this, what kind of information were you trying to get from this guy that you were so persistent with?
Trying to get information relative to a target, priority target.
Like a terrorist?
No, it would be an intelligence officer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So trying to find out about an intelligence officer for another country that might be operating in Canada?
Yes. Yeah.
Something like
that's exactly what it is. It's the targets, we'll call them targets, that we investigated, they have all sorts of contacts. And so some are innocuous contacts. And so sometimes buried within these very natural contacts they have, there can be something that's more clandestine. And so when you realize that's most likely the relationship, but you don't have details, you don't have context of it, where perhaps the person may, that other target may actually trust that person that you hope to have as a source. That's what you want to get in on. You want to get in on that covenant they may have with the other person, and get some sort of insight.
Tell me who the Lamberts were.
Well, the Lamberts was a couple, a real couple. They were Russian SVR intelligence officers that were sent to Canada as Canadians living in Toronto. And this was in the mid-90s, and it was kind of interesting because, you know, the end of the Cold War, 91, we talk about peace dividend, but with the Lambert case, it was obvious that the intelligence activity of the new Russian Foreign Service was no different than the KGB, their first chief directorate. So there was a couple that came to Canada, and they would be just very, you know, people that were inconspicuous, if you will. But they were part of an illegal residency, as it's called, basically sleeper agents. And so there appears to have been a breakdown in their relationship, and each ended up dating, seeing another Canadian, and at some point they were arrested and faced deportation. But you know, this type of activity, which we call illegals, the Russians have been doing since about the 1920s. It's a fascinating type of target. It's a very elusive target. You don't just find these cases, but they're the real deal. And so the government of Canada, Canadian government, could look at that time and say, okay, as far as the Russian government is concerned, they haven't changed anything at all in terms of hostile intelligence service activity.
What's Russia trying to gain from stuff like this?
Well, a lot of them, what they do with illegals is they're just there in place. They use the term spies. It's called reenactments. It's approximation to scout. So they're intelligence officers, whether they're illegals undercover or whether they're in an embassy, are like scouts. They see it as like they're behind the lines. So if there's a conflict, they'll be activated. What we've been seeing the last few years since the invasion of Ukraine, because a lot of the Russian legal residencies, this is the SVR, GRU, in Europe, have been shut down and they've been sent home, is that the illegals have been activated. And that's why we've seen a lot of arrests, particularly in Europe, both the SVR and the GRU, the military, is they've been tasking them to find out about war crimes at The Hague, tasking them to find out about NATO, because they've lost these stations or residencies that were being run out of the embassies. So this is probably one of the rare times in the last 100 years where the illegals are being told to basically get to work. Because a lot of them, that's what they would do. They would spend decades living their cover, living these assumed lives, as many of them did as Canadians, and then returning with, you know, a secure operation.
Is this a common thing? Like, are there a lot of Russian illegals secretly living in Canada? I
wouldn't say there's a lot. Now, there's a case called Ghost Stories, a fascinating story, and it was 10 illegals that were arrested in 2008 in the United States. 2 of the 10 actually were Canadians. They staged, as we would say, in Toronto, and then they moved to Boston. Now, they were multi-generational. They were old KGB, they were new SVR and more recent SVR, all caught up in it. And in this actual case is what led to, I think, the series, The Americans, because they were kind of like the spy next door, if you will. But what's really interesting about the Ghost Stories illegals, when you look at it, they didn't have jobs that required a clearance. They weren't stealing any secrets. They were getting close to people. So one of them, codename was Heathfield, as a Canadian in Boston. He went to the John F. Kennedy School at Harvard, and he used to have Scotch parties at home, and he'd have some of the students there. One of the students eventually became the president of Mexico. Another illegal, I think their cover name was Murphy, she got close to an aide to Hillary Clinton, I think just before she became Secretary of State. So this is sort of a new kind of dimension to SVR collection, where it's not just stealing secrets anymore, it's trying to get close to people, access to people that may in the future powerful positions, either in government or the private sector. And so that's really what I think we need to look at now more closely, is these illegals. Don't look at them trying to steal a secret, trying to get close to people. And it's pretty easy to do if your cover's good.
Sounds like an influence operation of sorts.
It is an influence operation, and I think that's what we're seeing more and more now in terms of hostile intelligence service activity, to get close to people. We saw this, of course, in Canada with the whole foreign interference piece, where some politicians may have been a little too close, witting or unwittingly, to some foreign governments. And so I think it's more influence operations than standard state espionage we've seen in the past, but it's a very nuanced threat, and it's hard to detect, and I'd say it's almost impossible to prosecute.
Well, yeah, because it sounds like you're saying that people are becoming friends.
Yeah.
And sometimes friendships can be dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Or they don't know. They don't know the person is reporting back to an intelligence service. So they may be speaking freely in their mind. So it's all relationship building. And maybe that let's say illegal is getting an assessment on the person, and then later they may be directly approached or something, maybe from a legal residency, which would be an intelligence officer, or it's down the road. And particularly with Russian intelligence, because they go for the long game. We call it seeding operations. They don't go Monday to Friday the way we do. They see these things taking place over years. And that Ghost Stories case I mentioned, that was decades. That was a lot of investment. Some that, started in South America, of Spanish heritage, back in the 70s, and then they end up in New Jersey in, the Audis.